historians or simple admirers, we can look back with some capacity to examine his life as well. But what personal pain did those ideals bring to the man himself? How did they influence his wife and children? Fortunately for us, both Leo Tolstoy and his wife Sonia kept voluminous diaries that faithfully recorded the triumphs and tragedies of their 48 years together. As a special presentation for this collection, Charles Francisco has gone through these intimate writings and composed a dramatized perspective of Tolstoy's marriage. Condensing 48 years in something more than 48 minutes is clearly a monumental task. If we believe that you will find these ensuing minutes of living history both informative and stimulating. We are pleased, therefore, to welcome to this forum the distinguished American actors, Ms. Frances Sternhagen and Mr. Charles Francisco, reading the actual work of Sonia and Leo Tolstoy, Ms. Sternhagen and Mr. Francisco.
That series of letters in front of you, Sonia, actually represents something I'd like to tell you. Could you possibly guess what it says, just from the initials?
There are so many letters. Is it only one sentence?
Yes, just 21 letters, 21 words, and one important sentence. Won't you try?
It begins with 2 Y's. Your youth and your desire for happiness remind me too keenly of my old age and of my incapacity for happiness.
Yes. Tell me, as an honest person, with hand on heart, and for God's sake, without haste, do you wish to be my wife? If you say yes boldly with all your heart, then say it. But if you have the faintest shadow of doubt, say no. I'm terrified to think of a no, but I'm prepared for it. It will be terrible if I am not loved by my wife as much as I love you.
And Sonia Bears, daughter of the court physician and his wife, did say yes to Count Leo Tolstoy, the already celebrated author, soldier, who at 34 was 16 years her senior. She had known him since childhood, and despite her mother's expectations that he would marry her older sister, Sonia loved Lev Nikolaevich and had long hoped that he loved her.
Tolstoy was deeply in love with the beautiful young woman, but his proposal of marriage came after a long and quite deliberate period of self-questioning. Convinced that he had wasted his early life in wanton sin, Tolstoy believed that Sonia could help him become the person he longed to be. He envisioned a perfect union in which mutual passion would be shared and balanced by understanding and absolute candor. Their diaries, letters, and innermost thoughts must always be shared.
I don't think I shall ever get over the horror I experienced when I read Lyova's diary before our marriage, and I doubt whether the sharp sting of jealousy and my bewilderment at the thought of such filth and debauchery will ever disappear. May God preserve all young souls from such wounds.
No one has had or will have such happiness. She's so good, so pure and harmonious. Only one thing tortures me: jealousy for the man who could be fully her equal. I am not. Why does such a being as she love me?
I haven't yet quite got used to things. It seems strange to me that when I'm at Yasnia, I'm at home. I'm frightened and abashed that Lyofochka loves me so much. Why should he? Could he stop loving me? I'm frightened of the future.
I love her when she sits close to me and says, "Novichka, why are chimneys built so straight? Or horses don't die for a long time, do they?" I love it when she gets angry with me. In a twinkling of an eye, she says, "Let me be, you bore me." But in a moment, she smiles timidly at me. I love her when she is a little girl in a yellow dress and sticks out her lower jaw and tongue at me. I love to look at her serious, childish, passionate face.
I have been frightened ever since yesterday when he told me he did not believe in my love. I know why he doesn't believe in it. Ever since my early girlhood, I have dreamed of a man as a whole, a new and pure man whom I could love. When I got married, I had to admit that my old dreams were foolish. And yet, I don't know that I can give them up altogether. He doesn't understand that his past is a whole world of 1,000 different emotions, good and bad, which will never belong to me. Today, I suddenly felt that we would gradually drift apart, that I would create my own sad world, and he a world full of work and doubt.
Tolstoy reveled in the glory of the physical passion he had awakened in her. But his growing desire to attain a higher level of spirituality left him with badly mixed emotions and a confused and unhappy young wife.
I listen to him sleeping, and I'm frightened to be alone. He won't let me go near him, which is sad. Physical things disgust him. He grows colder and colder every day, while I go on loving him more and more.
I have broken with all my past as never before. Whenever I compare myself with Sonia, I feel all my own vileness, but I cannot blot out the grievous past.
I sometimes feel that he and I are on opposite sides. His peasants can't completely absorb me any more than I can completely absorb him. If I can't absorb him, if I'm a doll, a mere wife, and not a human being, then I can't live this life. One day he will again center all his love on the peasants, and I shall be lost. He is an angel of charm and strength, constantly striving after good. Why have I ruined him whom everyone loves?
Life for the Tolstoys of Yasnaya Polyana was forever altered with the arrival of their first child, a little less than 10 months after their wedding. That erstwhile happy event inspired a new problem.
The doctor would not permit Sonia to nurse her son, a decision that greatly upset her husband.
It is revolting not to nurse one's own child.
Who says it isn't? But what can be done against a physical defect? This is another aspect of a husband's cruelty. One can't love a fly that keeps stinging one all the time.
I have read your words and I agree. I have been cruel and unkind. And to whom? To the one being who has given me the greatest happiness in life. But there is a good man within me who sometimes sleeps. Love him, Sonia. Try not to blame me.
With that crisis stilled, the Tolstoys embarked on a new adventure that would bring them into closer communion. After many false starts, Leo Tolstoy announced that he was finally ready to begin writing again.
It would be an epic novel of Napoleon's invasion of Russia that the world now knows as War and Peace.
And the years that work required were happy ones for Sonia Tolstoy. There was now a part of him that did belong to her. She painstakingly deciphered his daily scribbling and rewrote it in neat, longhand manuscript form. It was a labor of love that she would continue to perform.
Now I am a writer with all the strength of my soul, and I write and think as I have never written or thought before.
Night after night I sit up copying his work. My back and fingers ache and my eyes are bleary, but I am too much uplifted, exalted, carried away into a world of poetry to even know that I'm tired.
I know that I am sometimes unapproachable when I write. My only excuse is to write at the high tension necessary for creation. One has to forget everything else.
On his best days, he tells me he has left a bit of his flesh in the ink pot. He must have solitude. No hen must cackle. No dog must bark beneath his window.
The writer takes out the best of what is in his life and puts it into his work. His work is therefore beautiful and his life bad.
Tolstoy was frustrated in his quest for personal and artistic perfection. But there were surer signs that his life at Yasnya Polyana was both productive and good. Sonia took over much of the responsibility of managing the estate and presented him with a baby daughter and 2 more sons before War and Peace was completed.
Thank the Lord that both our memories and our dreams of the future are so good. What happiness is ours. And yet, we shall probably continue to quarrel at times. I love you so all the time in every possible way. But the more I love, the more I fear.
Sometimes when I'm alone in my room, I just laugh with joy. And making the sign of the cross, I say to myself, may God let this last many, many years. Despite the time that has passed, I love him more in the same restless, passionate, and poetic way.
Countess Tolstoy was ecstatic with the enormous success of War and Peace and the new recognition it brought her husband. She expected him to begin work soon on a new novel, but hoped he would take time before starting to become her close companion again. But her hopes were dashed.
Lyovochka spent all last summer reading and studying philosophy. He was involved in so much painful reflection that he often said his brain was aching with all the strain, that he was of no further use, that it was time to die. Later on, these gloomy moods passed, and he began to read Russian folk tales and epics, which gave him the idea of writing children's books. Then he started reading an immense number of plays. All of this while he has become obsessed with the study of Greek, a dead language. Not to no purpose is Greek dead, for it brings a man to a dead state of mind.
Tolstoy could find no literary project that he felt truly worthwhile. His general health deteriorated rapidly. And worried that he was going mad, Sonia persuaded him to travel to Samara to take the pumice cure.
He returned 6 weeks later, rested, but with the same haunted look in his eyes. His time for reflection among the peasants had rekindled his interest in the education of disadvantaged children, and he wrote a reading primer called the ABC Book. With Sonia's aid, he reopened his school for the children of the workers at Yasnya Polyana.
Schools based on compulsion provide not a shepherd for the flock, but a flock for the shepherd. When I see these dirty, tattered, thin lads with such bright eyes and angelic faces, I'm seized with fear and anxiety as though I were seeing drowning people. And what is drowning is that which is most valuable, the spiritual element that is so evident in children.
Schools occupy him from morning to night. I look on astonished and deplore the energy spent on this instead of on writing, and I wonder if it is of any real use. After all, his efforts benefit only one tiny corner of Russia.
But Countess Tolstoy was soon looking forward to assisting her husband on a new novel that would be called Anna Karenina. Again, they would be close, she thought. But their shared enthusiasm and hopes for the new book were abruptly shattered by illness and death.
In a crushing series of tragedies between November of 1873 and October of 1875, the Tolstoys suffered the loss of 3 young children, 2 little boys and a newborn daughter. as well as 2 aged aunts who lived with them. Leo Tolstoy became obsessed with death.
I cannot tear myself away from living creatures to bother about imaginary ones.
If one did not hope, life would be quite impossible. And I still hope that God will once again light that flame in Lyova's mind, which has kept him alive in the past.
What even is truth? If a man must die, one passes one's whole life seeking distraction in hunting or in work, merely not to think about death. If one should think deeply and picture death vividly, one can't live. In this meaningless and sad life, nothing awaits one but sickness, old age, suffering and annihilation. The 2 drops of honey which had diverted my eyes from the cruel truth, my love of family and of writing, are no longer sweet to me.
The Tolstoys' labor on Anna Karenina actually helped them endure their grief, and the first 3 parts of the novel were completed and sold to the Russian Herald for a handsome sum in 1875. But Tolstoy viewed the book with increasing contempt as he tried to complete it.
I am now getting to work again on my tedious, vulgar Karenina with only one wish: to get it out of the way as soon as possible.
We are really at work on Anna Karenina. That is, writing without interruption. Lyovochka is in a lively, concentrated state of mind. I work hard at copying all day, and I already have the fresh copies of the new chapter he wrote yesterday.
Everything in this book is execrable, and the whole thing ought to be rewritten. All that has been published, too, scratched out, thrown away, repudiated. I ought to say I'm sorry. I won't do it anymore. And try to write something fresh instead of this incoherent, neither fish nor fowl sort of stuff.
You're wrong, Lyovochka. This passage I've just copied, it's beautiful.
What's so difficult about writing about an officer falling in love with a married woman? There's nothing difficult in that. What's more, there's nothing good in it either. It's bad and it serves no purpose.
You'll see that I'm right, Lyovochka. You must finish it.
Sonia's predictions, of course, were correct, and the novel that Tolstoy found insignificant won him even greater praise than War and Peace. The royalties also brought considerable wealth to the Tolstoy household.
For the first time in their marriage, Sonia was able to afford a few of the material things that made her feel a little more like a countess, the wife of a literary genius. But the affluence brought only new pain for her husband, who was in the throes of his spiritual crisis, a deeply felt questioning that had begun before he married Sonia.
He turned to Orthodox Christianity for the answers to what he was and where he was going, and became a regular communicant for 2 years before breaking all ties with the faith in which he and his wife had been reared. Dismissing formal theology as a loathsome deceit, he set out to define Christ's Christianity, a religion in which God was love, truth, and the principle of all things. That quest would effect profound changes in the Tolstoy marriage.
Lyova is not only sad, he is absolutely broken. He neither eats nor sleeps, and he even weeps. His eyes are strangely fixed, and he scarcely speaks. He does not seem to belong to this world, and I think I may go mad. Some say he is committing artistic suicide, but it is not the money I regret. There's something lacking in my life, something that I loved, and that is his literary work that has always given me such joy and inspired me with such reverence. I'm a true writer's wife. So much do I take his writing to heart.
The aims of art are not to resolve a question irrefutably, but to compel one to love life in all its manifestations. If I were told that I could write a novel in which I could establish my point of view as indisputable truth on all social questions, I would not dedicate 2 hours to such work. But if I were told that my writings would be read 20 years from now by those who are children today, and that they would weep and laugh over it and fall in love with the life in it, then I would dedicate all my existence and all my powers to it.
He is writing again about religion and the disagreement between the church and Christianity. He reads all day long, and all his conversation is full of the teaching of Christ. His frame of mind is peaceful, meditative, and solemn. He still says sometimes, if I ever write anything again, I shall write something quite different. All I have written so far has been mere exercise.
As promised, Tolstoy's new writings were far different from all that had preceded them, and his search for Christianity, truth, and meaning became the centerpiece of his thought and actions. His desire to live simply saw him adopting peasant homespuns and sandals, and Sonia was hard-pressed to understand the drastic changes in the man she had married. She was pleased when he purchased a modest house in Moscow where their children could be properly educated. A family would winter there largely without Tolstoy, who preferred the country where he could learn from his former serfs and share their labor.
Lyovochka, you asked me to comment on your article, Moral Perfection. It's impossible to dispute your theory that it would be fine if people could be perfect. And you are right to remind them of this and to point out the path of perfection. Yet I can't refrain from saying that it is hard to give up all the toys of life. Perhaps I grasp these toys more eagerly than others. I do so love the way they glitter, tinkle, delight.
The triumphant, self-assured insanity of the life going around me makes me sad. I don't understand why it has been granted to me to perceive this insanity, while they are quite unable to understand their own madness. And so we stand face to face, not understanding each other and wondering at and condemning one another. But they are legion, and I am alone.
I begin to think, if a happy man can suddenly see in life only everything that is terrible and shuts his eyes to all that is good, then this must be the result of some illness. Long ago, you were as unhappy as you declare yourself to be now. Then you said you wanted to hang yourself because you lacked faith. Why, then, are you so unhappy now? You must have known before that hungry, sick, evil people existed. Surely you would be better to look around you. There are, I assure you, plenty of happy, healthy, and good people.
There may be truth in your belief that my present horror of civilization has some connection with my physical health. One's liver, no doubt, does count for something. Nevertheless, one's spiritual life is independent. Sonia, you write, I love you, but you no longer want my love. That is the one thing I do want. Only you can cheer me.
Tolstoy fervently hoped that Sonia would come to understand and share his ideal of spiritual truth. And just as passionately, she prayed that he would abandon his self-destructive ways and return to the poetic writing she so dearly loved. The regular arrival of new offspring demonstrated that their mutual physical attraction had not ebbed with time. The Count loved his children, but considered them further proof of his own weakness.
I would be just as much a Christian if I knew nothing of Christ's teaching apart from these 5 rules. Do not be angry. Do not fornicate. Do not swear. Do not judge. Do not make war. This is what the essence of Christ's teaching is for me.
Pregnant the 12th time during their 24 years of marriage, Sonia begged her husband to permit an abortion. Tolstoy was shocked and threatened to leave her, and the difficult pregnancy nearly precipitated the end of their marriage. A violent quarrel between them sent Tolstoy storming out of the house as Sonia was about to go into labor. He returned before his new daughter was born, but pointedly refused to speak to his wife, and their relationship became strained as never before.
Sonia continued in a state of near hysteria for many months and filled her diary with threats of suicide, knowing that her husband would read it. His repeated warning that she was driving him away only made matters worse.
He turned to Christianity. The martyrdom was mine, not his.
I often speak coldly to her, even in a hostile manner. Never have I entreated her with tears to believe in the truth or told her everything simply, lovingly, softly. Yet here she lies beside me and I say nothing to her. What ought to be said to her, I say to God.
The writer was haunted by his inability to remain chaste, and found it easier to spend much of his late middle age away from his wife in pursuit of his personal ideals. Sonia struggled to maintain a lifestyle suitable for the family of a titled and respected literary genius.
Tolstoy told all who called him Count that he was simply Leo Nikolaevich, and with great effort became a vegetarian and gave up all alcohol, tobacco, hunting, and other lifelong pleasures. When not writing treatises on Christianity or the evils of wealth, he spent his days working at menial chores and preaching to the people from all walks of life who flocked to his philosophical banner. Embarrassed by his own wealth, he tried to find a way out by transferring everything legally to his wife.
Sonia refused, but eventually agreed to a compromise that gave her power of attorney to administer his affairs, as well as ownership of the copyrights of all the books he wrote before 1881. In a display of business skill unusual for a 19th century woman, Sonia arranged the publishing of low-priced volumes for the mass market that enlarged Tolstoy's fame and the family fortune. That led to another major explosion.
Can you not see that you are making me appear to be even more of a hypocrite? You're making a mockery of all my beliefs. You know my feeling that everything I write is for the free use of humanity. You're charging for these books far too much.
That is not at all my intention, Yovochka. The price is not high. Need I remind you that you yourself asked for much more money when you negotiated the original arrangement for Anna Karenina?
I cannot go on living this way. I want a divorce. I'm going to Paris or America.
Divorce? What is wrong, Yovochka? What has happened?
Oh, nothing. But when the cart is more and more overloaded, the horse at last stands still and can't draw it.
I don't know what you mean. What is being loaded upon you? I don't understand.
You don't understand? After all I've said and written? God help me. Wherever you are, the air is poisoned.
If that is your true feeling for me, then you may stay and I shall leave.
Sonia's luggage was packed, but the fury of their quarrel sent the smaller Tolstoy children into hysterics, and Tolstoy himself collapsed in tears. The immediate crisis was eased by what he later termed the sham cement of a kiss.
But their long-term ethical conflict was far from solved. When Tolstoy went away to visit a friend, he left a letter behind warning his wife that the struggle between them was based on a simple premise: either God or no God. His resolve softened later, and he apologized.
My darling, how grieved I am that you torment yourself so much. I rejoice that I am again in a normal state and shall not distress you as I have lately done.
What I will never understand is why the truth must bring evil and dissension. Dissension not among ruffians, but quiet, loving people. For the first time in my life, I was glad that you had gone away. How sad that is.
In the midst of that uneasy truce, tragedy struck again with the death of their 4-year-old son. Despite his denunciations of the church, Tolstoy honored Sonia's wishes and permitted an Orthodox funeral. Grieving and guilt-stricken because of her husband's criticism that she was a disappointment to God in her role of wife and mother, Sonia began to devote even more time to publishing and the supervision of the family finances. And that work, of course, was destined to cause further dissension and pain.
Everyone, Lev Nikolaevich, as well as the older children who follow him like sheep, have come to think of me as a scourge. After handing me all the responsibility for the little ones and their education, the management of the estate, and the complete control of the money, they keep coming to tell me what, with a superior, pious look on their faces, that I must give such and such a peasant a horse, or some flour, or some cash, or something or other. I cannot judge the worthiness of these perpetual demands, and they annoy and bewilder me. Oh, how often I long to drop it all and be done with this exhausting existence. I'm tired of the endless struggle and suffering.
Tolstoy was trapped between his duty as a family provider and his sincere desire to be rid of the trappings of class and wealth. His despair that Sonia might never see the light was somewhat relieved when their two oldest daughters became true believers. He encouraged them to copy his writings, robbing Sonia of a chore she had always loved.
But the individual who would earn Sonia's eternal enmity by replacing her as her husband's chief source of trust and inspiration was young Vladimir Grigorovich Chertkov, member of a prominent family whom Tolstoy would come to regard as his chief disciple.
Sonia approved of Chertkov in the beginning because he was attractive and well-bred and not at all like the dark ones, as the household called most of those who came to learn at the master's feet. But as the years passed, Tolstoy's growing trust in Chertkov aroused very strong emotions in Sonia.
Why, Lyovochka, must you deliberately shut your eyes to people in whom you don't want to see anything but good?
Sonia's resentment grew even deeper when her husband permitted Chertkov to publish his writings in small volumes priced at only 1.5 kopecks each. More than 12 million copies were sold in just 4 years, and Chertkov no longer felt obliged to ingratiate himself with Sonia.
I read over Chertkov's letter, in which he spoke of the happy spiritual communion between himself and his wife, and expressed sympathy and regret that Lev Nikolaevich should be ignorant of such happiness and be deprived of such a communion. An obvious allusion to me, that blunt, sly, untruthful man, having succeeded in getting around LN with his flattery, is now trying to destroy the bond which has so closely kept us together. This Chertkov relationship must end.
Tolstoy seemed more comfortable in his lifestyle and returned to writing fiction in the form of plays, which pleased Sonia, although she disagreed with most of the philosophy they contained. But the seeker of spiritual perfection was still unable to adhere to his ideal of chastity in marriage. And in 1888, at the age of 44, Sonia gave birth to their 13th child, a son.
At her husband's insistence, Sonia painfully breastfed the new infant. Tolstoy left soon after the birth, traveling on foot from Moscow to the estate at Yasnya Polyana, and returned to a play he would call the Kreutzer Sonata.
I have just read the writings of the American Shakers, and they are excellent, complete sexual restraint. I suppose I shall not overcome this problem of lust in a hurry because I am a dirty, libidinous old man. But I must propose the Shaker arrangement to Sonia.
Sonia knew that Tolstoy had always used real events and people, even herself, as models for the plots and characters in his fiction. But reading the rough drafts of the Kreutzer Sonata, she was shocked to learn that everything in it was embarrassingly obvious. He was writing about their marriage.
Sonia copies the Kreutzer Sonata, and it agitates her. Last night she spoke about the disillusionment of the young woman, about the feelings of the man that she found so strange because of his lack of feeling toward the children. She's unjust because she wishes to justify herself. Sometimes I feel very sorry for her. And it is often then, or in anger, that the devil of sexual desire falls upon me, as I have fallen again. It was so loathsome as after a crime. What if a child should be born? How shameful, especially before the children. They will reckon when it happened, and they will read what I write in this play. It has become sad.
It is fine for Lev Nikolaevich to write and advise others to be chaste. But what of himself?
Sonia came with the news that she is not pregnant. I suggested that it would be wise to sleep apart. She says she's glad she's not pregnant, but does not wish to be apart.
Tolstoy's railing against the sacrament of marriage in the Kreutzer Sonata is defining it as authorized licentiousness. Enraged the Orthodox hierarchy, and the play was officially banned. That only increased the public's interest. Widely circulated contraband copies and unauthorized play readings in private homes made the work a sensation.
The author was annoyed by what he considered the misinterpretations of his play, but Sonia found everything about the new work deeply painful. She saw no uplifting spiritual message in it and believed that it simply sensationalized the most intimate details of their marriage in a way that would only titillate the public. Her fears were justified, and the shattering of her romantic illusions drove husband and wife even further apart.
Lyova has broken off all relations with me. I've been reading his diaries in hope of seeing what I could bring into his life that would unite us again, but they only deepen my despair. He evidently has discovered that I have been reading them because he has now hidden them away, without saying anything to me. I thought I had loved him all my life. Now I see clearly that I simply idealized him without realizing that there was nothing in him except sensuality.
But Leo Tolstoy was not alone in his sensuality, and despite her bitterness, neither of them could long suppress their desire for each other.
Lyova is unusually kind, pleasant, and cheerful. But all this is due to the old cause. If only those who have swallowed the Kreutzer Sonata could see the life their teacher leads himself, which alone makes him happy, they would hurl their tin god off the pedestal on which they have placed him. Oh, and yet I love him best when he is weak, kind, and normal in his habits. It may not be good to be an animal, but neither is it any good to preach principles you can't practice.
A man striving after Christ's ideal is like a man carrying a lantern on a long stick. The light will always be ahead of him, and yet it will shine in the dark and show him the right path.
Despite her abhorrence of the Kreutzer Sonata, Sonia obtained a personal audience with the Tsar and persuaded him to lift the ban on the play, partially so that she might include it in the 13th volume of the complete works of Tolstoy that she wanted to publish. Her victory led to more controversy.
The wheedling of the emperor was most distasteful to me. There must have been something nasty in the Kreutzer Sonata. Every reminder of it has become revolting to me. For it to stir up such evil, there must have been something wrong in my motives for writing it.
Over Sonia's objections, Tolstoy renounced all rights to his work published after 1881, as well as anything he might write in the future. His family was thus cut off from its main source of income, and Sonia's future publishing efforts were seriously threatened.
The author attempted to mollify the fears of his wife and children in a family conference in which he divided all his worldly goods among them. The breaking of these material chains of guilt was a wonderful tonic for the great man. Gaiety returned to the household after a very long absence.
Sonia and her husband labored together to offset some of the effects of a famine that seized Russia. Despite conflicts with the government, separations, and inner turmoil over Chertkov's attempts to gain control of Tolstoy's private papers, relative peace reigned between husband and wife.
I have not been so close to my wife for 10 years, and that is more important than anything else.
I am so lonely, Lyovochka. Please come home. What a misfortune at the age of 48 to love a man like you.
I know only two things: that I love you with all my soul, that I long to see you and to calm you.
But this almost idyllic period of their lives ended midway in 1894, when Chertkov took a house near Yasnaya Polyana. Normalcy was completely shattered when death claimed their youngest child, the bright and sensitive Vanichka, shortly before his 7th birthday. He was the one on whom Sonia lavished affection when her husband was absent. And it was Vanichka who eagerly discussed philosophy with his 65-year-old father during their long walks together, prompting some to predict that the little boy might grow up to be an even greater genius.
It's sinful to mourn for the dead. But I had dreamed that Vanichka, alone of all my sons, would carry on my task after my death. Why do children die? Why did this particular child die? He was sent like a harbinger to a world not yet ready to receive him. He froze like a swallow coming too soon.
Lyovochka has grown all bent. He wanders about with an infinitely sad look in his eyes, and it is clear that the last shining light of his old age has vanished. It is painful to look at him. Terrible. This sorrow has crushed him.
But Tolstoy's deep religious convictions strengthened him in his grief, while Sonia was destined to never fully recover from Vanichka's death.
She was at first not even able to cry or verbalize her grief in any way. She sank into an unshakable depression that left her teetering on the brink of madness, and began attending church services every day. Her husband considered that a sign that she was finally ready for the spiritual awakening he had long sought.
Motherhood has kept her receptive to spiritual truth. I am deeply impressed by her humility and the purity of her soul. She submits to the will of God, only praying him to show her a way to live without the little being she so greatly loved. I've never loved Sonia as I do now. I feel with every nerve of my body the truth of the words that a man and wife are not two separate beings, but one.
What is so terrible is that 8 children still remain, and yet I feel so utterly alone in my grief. They are all very kind and loving to me, but I cannot enter into their existence. More than anything, I am comforted by the fact that you and I are once again tender towards each other, and I am so grateful for your tolerance and understanding.
I understand everything now. I realize that you could not come to me, and for that reason, you've had to remain alone. But you are not alone because I am with you. I love you just as you are, and shall love you to the very end, as hard as it is possible to love.
The basis of our relationship, an inner feeling for one another, is still serious, strong, and harmonious. We both know what is good, and we both love one another. Thank God for this. The eyes of both of us are turned in the same direction, towards the exit door of life, and neither of us fears it.
This new feeling binding us together is strange. It is only occasionally that the clouds of our failure to understand one another obscure the light. But I hope that before nightfall these clouds will disperse, and our sunset will be quite clear and limpid.
For people with the restless souls and differing beliefs of Sonia and Leo Tolstoy, that totally happy ending would prove to be difficult. Unable to fully emerge from her depression, Sonia threw herself into a long, one-sided infatuation with a renowned concert pianist. The relationship was platonic, but it provoked jealous rages from Tolstoy.
Nor was Sonia immune to unreasoned jealousy, suspecting her husband of infidelity with several women, and even with Chertkov. Each passing year brought bolder Tolstoy criticism of a wide range of injustices perpetrated by the government, and although frightened for their safety, Sonia stood by him. His final great novel, Resurrection, inspired the Russian church to excommunicate him, and it was Sonia who first rushed to her husband's defense in a scathing and widely published letter to the hierarchy.
Crisis always brought them together with mutual professions of undying love.
As indicated by her words when he lay close to death in 1901.
My Lyovochka is dying, and I realize now that my life cannot go on without him. For everyone else, he is a celebrity. For me, he is all my being.
But while his legions of admirers sadly awaited the dread news, Tolstoy survived.
And later managed to joke about his condition. The priests who hovered nearby hoping for a deathbed repentance, and all who expressed genuine concern about his welfare.
A quiet death under the influence of the church is like death under morphia. Now, if I should again begin to die, I really must bring it off. It can't be another farce like this one. All these letters and telegrams, and suddenly it turns out to be untrue that I'm dying. It's simply indecent.
The second half of the 1890s became a period of great external and internal conflict. The war with Japan and strikes and revolts inside the country made the world eager to know where Leo Tolstoy stood on these events.
And he made it clear that he had not changed his position. The situations disturbed him deeply, but because he was totally opposed to all violence, he could be on neither side. Old age had at last helped him conquer the devil of sensuality, and he felt even more comfortable on a spiritual level.
Lyova is again writing that hateful propaganda. Devils, hell, all sorts of nastiness, revolting. His writing is saturated with a truly diabolical spirit of negation. God grant his heart may be softened. The time that I foresaw has come. My passionate husband is dead. A husband friend there never was. Happy lives live to the end in friendship and sympathy with their husbands, but the lonely wives of egotists, great men, are the wives whom posterity makes Xantippes.
Sonia had often expressed a desire for death, and her wish was nearly fulfilled. It was discovered she had a uterine tumor and urgently needed an operation. Her close brush with death sent Tolstoy into tearful collapse, causing him to admit that he could neither read nor write without the sound of her footsteps in the hall.
But within weeks of that confession, outside criticism of the family lifestyle hardened the author's outlook.
Our life is again very disgusting. They sport, doctor themselves, go hither and yon, take part in this or that, and concern themselves with what is not their business. They have no real life because they have no obligations. It is frightful.
Sonia's recovery was not yet complete when death claimed another of her children, daughter Masha. Her distress was compounded by Chertkov's return from exile. Again, he took a house close to Yasnya Polyana, forcing Sonia to entertain him and growing numbers of the Dark Ones.
Tchaikovsky's clear influence over the master made the title Heir Apparent no joke to Sonia. Unlike the family members, Chertkov thought nothing of interrupting Tolstoy when he was working, and it became clear to Sonia that he intended to collect every scrap of her husband's writings for his own use. Continuing attacks on his family's lifestyle, Sonia's request for police protection following local violence, and even the plans for an elaborate international celebration of his 80th birthday all deeply embarrassed Tolstoy and strengthened the critics who called him a hypocrite.
His body now lives a separate existence, and his spirit remains indifferent to earthly life, somewhere aloof, independent of the body. He is experiencing something new, strange and far away, and I'm unbearably saddened by his remoteness. There's a loss of something in him, in his relationship to me and everything around him.
Tolstoy was in the middle of a continual tug of war between the two people closest to him, his wife and his principal disciple. Sonia's suspicions that Chertkov intended to appropriate her husband's papers were confirmed. Hoping to preserve the family's literary inheritance, she also began to collect and copy her husband's immediate writings, most intimate writings. Tolstoy found it an impossible situation.
In your own words, you said that only those writings that appeared after 1881 were to become public property. You said nothing at all about any work not published. Those rightfully belong to your family.
But I never promised that, Sonia.
You would prefer to reward an outsider with the inheritance that any other man would provide for his children?
You suppose our children, then, to be rogues who want me to do something opposed to what is most sacred to me?
To wish for money with which to support your children is no proof of being a rogue. But
let me finish speaking. According to you, our children would be willing to play the lowest possible trick on me. You know full well that it was the principles of my faith that made me renounce my copyrights. In God's name, what do you want? I gave you my fortune, my early writings, and now you seem to expect me to give you that for which I live. Every day I receive abusive letters that accuse me of hypocrisy. Now you ask me, in very fact, to become a hypocrite and a scoundrel.
Chertkov was present at this quarrel, and battle lines were clearly drawn. Since her rival espoused absolute belief in Tolstoy's principles, it was a battle that Sonia could not win. Torn between the demands of the two, Tolstoy began to keep a secret diary that neither could read. But when he thought he was dying, he handed it over to Chertkov with the plea that he delete any passages that might embarrass Sonia.
Sonia's sense that her struggle to protect the interests of her family was hopeless began to destroy her fragile health. She had few moments of calm and continually complained that the entire world, even her children, believed that she was deliberately poisoning the last days of a sainted man. The doctors her family summoned diagnosed her condition as uncontrollable hysteria. She tried to escape by writing her autobiography.
Guests are always preventing me from working. I'm in a terrible state of nerves, short of breath, and I keep wanting to cry. I have too many different things to do.
Her unstable mental condition caused Tolstoy to agree reluctantly with Chertkov's long insistence that he draw up a new will. Without Sonia's knowledge, the author signed the papers that placed all of his writings in the public domain, and also named his daughter Sasha the executor and Chertkov the administrator of his literary estate.
Yasnya Polyana became a house of intrigue, guilt, and despair in 1910. Fearing that she was being shut out of her husband's life, Sonia was frantic in her distrust of everyone. Tolstoy felt great pity for her, but her frenzied threats and attempts at suicide left him desolate. The breaking point came when he found her rifling through his most private possessions in the middle of the night. He was shocked into making a decision he had long considered. and worked until dawn composing a letter that might explain his action.
Sonia, my departure will grieve you. I am sorry for that. But please understand and believe that I could not act otherwise. My position in the house has become unbearable. I can no longer live in these conditions of luxury. And I am doing what old men my age commonly do, leaving this worldly life in order to live out my last days in peace and solitude. Please try to understand this, and do not follow me if you learn where I am. Your coming would only make your position and mine worse, and would not alter my decision. I thank you for your honorable 48 years of life with me. And I beg you to forgive me for anything in which I have been at fault toward you, as I, with all my soul, forgive you for any wrong you have done me. I advise you to reconcile yourself with the new position in which my departure places you, and not to have an unkindly feeling toward me. If you want to report anything to me, give it to Sasha. She will know where I am, for she has promised me not to tell anyone.
Tolstoy left Yasnya Polyana at sunrise, and Sonia, who had slept late, knew nothing of his departure until after 11 that morning, when Sasha gave her his message. The abandoned wife rushed from the house and threw herself into the freezing waters of a pond. She was rescued, but her suicidal state prompted Sasha to send telegrams to all the family members urging them to come home. Sonia traced Tolstoy's train ticket and correctly guessed that he was taking refuge in a monastery.
All of Sonia's children knew her suicide threats were serious, and each wrote letters to their father. They did not condemn his action, but pleaded with him to communicate in any way that might preserve their mother's life.
Although sorrowful, Tolstoy refused to be moved, and only Sonia's personal plea prompted a reply. He wrote that a meeting or a reconciliation was quite impossible.
Do not think that I went away because I do not love you. I love you and pity you with all my soul, but I cannot do otherwise than I am doing. Farewell, dear Sonia. May God help you.
Hoping to escape her pursuit, the 82-year-old author headed south on a long train journey. But his companions noted that he was desperately ill when they arrived at the town of Astopovo, and they found shelter for him in the little house of the station master. The world was quickly informed that Leo Tolstoy was dying.
Sonia left for Astopovo immediately. Hadn't she always been the one who nursed him? She was astounded when refused admittance to his death chamber. In front of his admirers, reporters, and the prying eyes of early newsreel cameras. Her husband made loving inquiries about her, but she was forced to remain away in a trackside vigil that lasted for 5 days. When she was finally allowed to enter, he was comatized and ready to breathe his last. He never saw her or heard her anguished cry.
I loved him so much, and so blunderingly.
Above all, the Tolstoy marriage was a love story, far more complex and tragic than the imaginings of any writer. Sonia lived for another 9 years, burdened by the personal fate she had foreseen so much earlier.
Happy wives live to the end in friendship and sympathy with their husbands. The lonely wives of great men are the wives whom posterity makes Xantippes.
Forced curtain call. That's good. Thank you.
Sternhagen's Frances both admiring and reading those marvelous extracts, bringing the whole story to life and reminding us how the life both of Tolstoy and of Tolstoy herself almost in its own way a great dramatic work, which they showed in their reconstruction of it, and it's a very moving occasion. I think it's some consolation to those of us who are authors due to repeated that Tolstoy thought Anna Karenina was rubbish. Thank you very much indeed. Oh yes, and now we're having a tea break.
Mr. Chairman, might I suggest that at this point we're at the time which the program says Mr. Green's talk should start. I think that if we break, we may not come back in unison and that you would lose it. It's late in the afternoon, and I would urge that we give Mr. Green a chance to.
I think most people would agree with that, wouldn't they? What does Mr. Green think?
Well, as long as somebody has my paper, yes. Handing it into the copy.
Oh. Has anyone got the copy? I think we are. Does anyone disagree? If so, please don't say so. Because I think most people are agreed. It would be fairer on Mr. Green and all of us to hear him now.
Yes.
Oh yes, please. Who has the transcript, please, amongst the technician or translator? Does anyone? Do we have it? Is it up there? Do you have it up in the translating room, please?
Chuck?
I think as